On today's More Than a Test, we are joined by Erin Mote. Erin Mote is the co-founder of InnovateEDU. She is also the co-founder of the Brooklyn Lab School, and this story is amazing. She's going to make you passionate about interoperability, meeting the needs of students with special services, building your own school, and really believing that we can make changes and do things differently so that every child has what they need. She's an inspiration. It's a great conversation. Don't miss it today on More Than a Test. Erin, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to have a chat.
I was really excited for this particular conversation. We had to reschedule. We had some technical difficulties the first time we tried to record, but you were off in Washington, D.C. for something with InnovateEDU. Will you tell me a little bit more about what you were doing in D.C.?
Yeah, happy to. So, alongside a host of partners, including the Office of the First Lady at the White House, we were able to work on something I'm very excited about, not just for military families, but frankly for all children. So, at InnovateEDU, we run a large scale alliance called Project Unicorn. It's actually our oldest alliance. It focuses on data interoperability. It's 9 years old, so it's the same age as my son. And one of the things that we're really focused on there is thinking about how we can make it easier to move data securely between applications. And so a couple months ago, the Office of the First Lady approached us and said that the First Lady had been hearing through the Joining Forces initiative at the White House from military families about a huge struggle that they've been having. Frankly, not just right now, but throughout the history of sort of military service, that when our exceptional families in the military, those families who have students with disabilities, are transferred base to base every 2 to 3 years. Oftentimes, young people's IEPs are not being transferred. It's an enormous burden on our service members. And students on average, through our friends at Partners for Promise, a great organization who's done some work, are not receiving services on average until 4.4 months into the following school year. So that's January or February for some students. And so mom, dad, guardian transfers to a new military base. They know they're going to be there. They have advance notice of that transfer, but those records, that IEP isn't coming across state lines or isn't going to Abu Dhabi or Okinawa where they might be posted. And so that young person is really bearing the brunt of not getting those special education services. And so we've crafted a new initiative called Moving with the Mission, which is all about over the next year really tackling this issue of military family IEPs and interoperability. But,
I
at
am
InnovateED, yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
so glad I asked this question. I had no idea what you were doing in DC, and it could have gone
Yeah,
anywhere. But I don't think people realize just how military families make sense, right? They're being transferred for jobs all of the time, probably sometimes in the middle of the school year. And
yep,
so, and you're talking about IEPs, which I would say are like probably the most important to move. But every piece of data is hard for kids, and getting them in the right classes. I'm
yep,
sure, especially in middle school and high school. I actually have a story. At one point, I was leading at a middle school in Boulder, and an eighth grader at my school whose dad was the superintendent of Denver Public Schools. They were moving to Singapore, where he was going to be the head of the school in Singapore. They struggled to move his IEP from Boulder to Singapore, despite his dad being like the head of the education systems we were talking about. So I can imagine that a family that's not only just moving kids' schools, but their whole life at the drop of a hat for military service. This is huge and super important.
yeah. And frankly, if we can, solve this for military kids, we can solve this for all highly transient kids. And so this work would take on those IEPs, those individual education plans, but also 504s, which are a document that often, students might not yet have an IEP, but maybe they have testing accommodations or other supports. Those are listed in 504s. And so imagine just also being able to take this off of our service members' plate, if you will, while they're doing that cross border move, sometimes across international borders, sometimes in the US, but probably all of our listeners have moved at some point. It's one of my least favorite things to do. You have this giant checklist of things you need to get done. If we can just remove one of those things off that parent or guardian's checklist and make it easier for them while they serve our country, I think that feels like a worthy mission. So moving with the mission, we're excited to get it sort of off the ground. We're working with EdTech solution providers right now to do some technical feasibility work, but very soon I hope we'll be able to get to the field and start implementing.
Okay, I want to ask one more question about this, and then let's talk a little bit more
Sure.
broadly about InnovateEDU does. The question I was thinking of is, you mentioned you're working with EdTech partners. Has technology made this easier, or in some ways is even more complicated because of safety and privacy issues? Like, it's easy to send now, but like crossing the dot, like checking all the things that need to be checked for a child who has an IEP or a 504 is possibly more difficult. What would you say?
I don't think this is a technology problem. This is a business problem. This is a business process problem. And this is a place where education technology, frankly, has to come up to par with the rest of the world in terms of interoperability. Interoperability is the secure, safe transfer of data across applications. And so when we're implementing interoperability protocols, the data is actually more safe, not just as it's transited, but also at rest, which means when it's in those systems. And so I believe that when we invest in these foundational layers of interoperability, privacy, and frankly, cybersecurity, we make the digital ecosystem so much safer for our young people's data.
That's great to hear. I think that makes me feel better that maybe we will be able to solve this. Tell me, is this what Innovate EDU does? Is this kind of what you're known for? Is like, if there's a problem, just call you up and you'll find some, I don't think you built Innovate EDU thinking, service members IEPs.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that just how it works? Is any organization, the government, whoever has some sort of education problem to solve, they come to you?
Well, at InnovateEDU, I think we take on problems of practice through uncommon alliances. And so I always tell people InnovateEDU is sort of the Procter and Gamble of education, because we have all these alliance brands under this umbrella. So this work was done under the Project Unicorn banner, but we also have the Educating All Learners Alliance that we leveraged here, where we have built a coalition over 160 organizations who are focused on students with disabilities, or the work we're doing over at EdSafe AI Alliance, which is really at the forefront of the intersection of safe, accountable, fair, transparent, and efficacious use of AI in education. So at InnovateEDU, we really think about large-scale sector change through uncommon alliances, bringing people together who don't usually work together. And we do this through the lens of policy, practice, and technology. And those aren't three separate domains. They all sort of feed together. You have to understand what's good practice in order to drive policy. You have to understand how policy might impact practice. And frankly, technology is often a means to do some of this work. And in this case, we have a set of expertise around interoperability, around students with disabilities. And frankly, we have a set of relationships in the EdTech community that mean that solution providers know that we understand their business case, and the field knows that we understand their use case. And so we don't say yes to everybody who comes to us. We sort of look at what our core strengths are and say, yeah, we think we have the capacity to make large scale change here. And sometimes we say no. We'll say that's not the right fit for us, but we know a great partner who could take that on, or there's a great existing coalition that you could build upon, not necessarily build anew. And so we're really trying to build that connective tissue within our sector in education so that we can make much more impactful change at a much faster rate of iteration.
I really love that you kind of pointed out this connection that you make between organizations and companies and school districts, because I think what you've said is very true, is that there's often a very large gap between the two, and that we're over here with a solution at Amira or anywhere else, and they're over here with a school, and that ability to make the two things work isn't as simple as most people think.
Yeah, and I think we often talk past each other. Like I think we see solution providers maybe sometimes not listening to our school district providers, and then vice versa. I think we use different language. We sometimes in this space um, think that if we solve for this school district, we've solved for all contexts, and that's not necessarily true. And so um, there's a lot of work to do in our space, particularly in EdTech, around the supply and demand side, and doing that champion and translation work that I think we're so good at InnovateEDU. I think it's among our largest core competencies.
Oh, that's so great. And I think that most providers would tell you that they're always well served when they finally start communicating and understanding the language of educators. So I can imagine how valuable that is. You keep talking about interoperability, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask you to tell the story that I actually is the reason I originally asked you to be on the podcast. I heard you tell this story about how like you were taking a shower and you were like thanking God for the pipes. I don't know if it's God, but like you know what I'm saying? That idea of the pipes. And I don't think people realize just how many programs your kids are using when they're in school, and just how much that data doesn't always like easily talk to it. So like even though all these programs are being used and AI is so great, there's still a teacher somewhere with a spreadsheet or a grade book just trying to get everything to talk to each other. And so I
Yeah.
would love for you to one, tell that story, and two, talk about a little bit why that's so like important to you.
Yeah, so like probably many of your listeners, I have experience working in schools, and so and started founding a charter school in New York City that was a middle school, and a big part of our hypothesis at Brooklyn Lab was how do we get our kids out into the amazing learning experiences that were proximate in our own city, in New York City, some of the best cultural institutions in the world. And the good news is at New York, we can get kids on the subway for free and get them somewhere. So we don't even have to like do all that yellow bus ordering that maybe some of your listeners have to do. So we used to do this all the time. We used to go on middle school trips all the time. And, when you go on field trips, it's not just the teachers who are going, it's sort of an all hands activity when you're trying to get 200 middle schoolers out into New York and transit through the subway. So I used to come home from those field trips in downtown Brooklyn, and I got to be honest, I would just feel gross. You're outside with kids all day, you're running around, you're on the subway to and from, and you're just exhausted. There's just, there's something about wrangling kids on field trips that is just a special level of exhaustion. So all I used to ever want to do when I went into my apartment in downtown Brooklyn was just take a hot shower. And I would, just sort of, you all know this, you like take your shoes off as you're walking in the door, you're like taking your clothes off as you're walking to the shower, just like your single destination. And I would remember standing in that shower and just being like, oh, this feels so good. Thank gosh. But I would never, like, in that shower say, oh my gosh, thank God for the hot water pipes in my building. Or thank gosh for that reservoir in upstate New York that's likely feeding the water into those pipes. And I feel like that's a little bit how we think about interoperability and the foundational layers of technology that I talked about, privacy and cybersecurity, that you know those are the things, the pipes that connect data, that give us the hot showers, the data dashboards, the visualizations, the ability to then action data, which is, I think, where we want educators to go. We want school administrators to go, but that data isn't always connected. The pipes aren't always feeding the hot showers. And so if we don't, we'll never get those hot showers if we don't invest in the pipes. And so um, so much of the work we do at InnovateEDU is thinking about how do we make the market more efficient, so that folks understand what they're buying when they're choosing those ed tech tools, if it's interoperable, if it's private, if it's secure, if it's accessible, if it's aligned with pedagogy and practice through an evidence base. How do we make it easier at the procurement juncture for folks to understand that? How do we help solution providers build their evidence base, move towards interoperability, understand the latest in what's happening in privacy and security? And so that connection, again, between supply and demand, the connection of those pipes within school systems, is the only way we're going to get to those hot showers. And so but it's hard. You don't ever think about it when you're in that hot shower. God, I
Well, and
really love these pipes.
And I think about, I love that you also brought in like the water and where the water is coming from, because it kind of gives you an image of just how hard this is for schools. And that I think it was you mentioned EdSafe Alliance AI, and Carl Rectanis I think told me 124 different tech products is how many every student is coming into contact with in a school year at school, right?
Yeah,
And
it's
so
enormous.
and then the idea that a teacher is going to get the information from all of those places on every single student to then make the best decisions, get them the hottest shower or the best shower possible, is like, it almost feels insurmountable. What are you telling schools when you're saying, when they're looking at, I mean, right now the big thing is AI products, right? When they're looking at this mountain, this avalanche of AI products coming at them, what are you telling them as far as, one, making the best decisions for the products, and then two, making them work together?
Yeah, so we think there's really five things that districts should be looking at when they're thinking about an EdTech product. And I'm going to steal something from my colleague Joseph South at ISTE. This might date me, but he explains this like it's a Trivial Pursuit piece. So I don't know if you all remember, but in Trivial Pursuit, you had this like circle, and then you had to go around the board and get little pie pieces for each part of that Trivial Pursuit piece. And so you had to like get a question in sports or history or pop culture. And so that's a little bit about how we think about ed tech, and that, no one's going to buy a product just on interoperability, just like no one's going to buy a product just based on, an evidence base. They should be looking at a set of factors, some which are, again, foundational, like, does this work in an ed tech ecosystem? And this is when you have 124 products, you have to ask yourself, am I just like adding something that's not going to talk to anything, that's not going to be private or secure, that's frankly like going to frustrate my users, whether those be parents or whether those be students or whether those be educators, right? And so, is it interoperable? Can you roster to it from an interoperability standard or from a piece of middleware like a ClassLink, a Clever, a D2L? Is it private? I mean, so much of our responsibility in education is to ensure that we are being stewards of our minors' data. And so, are you evaluating it for privacy? Are you thinking about how it keeps that data secure? So, it's not just, is it private, is it locked down within a source system, but as you're getting that data out of the system, are you using things like two-factor authentication, something that all of us are super familiar with because we all get that, those annoying text messages when we try to log into Target and we have the wrong password. That's
Right.
two-factor authentication. We all know it. And the fact that it's at Target and not in our EdTech apps, I think is a scratch the head question for me sometimes. Again, the evidence base, like, do we know that this solution works? And for me, that means, are we looking at the ESSA tiers of evidence? Every EdTech product out there should at least have a logic model for what they believe the product will do. I think you'd be shocked by how many of the EdTech top 40 don't even have a logic model on their website about what outcomes they hope for students, for educators, for parents, and communities come from the use of their product. And then also, is it accessible, and can all of our students access it? Is it designed with, if it's a pedagogy tool, is it designed with the principles of universal design for learning? Again, this is my belief that if we design for the widest use case possible, if we shovel the ramp, not just shovel the stairs, everyone can get up that entrance and can access that technology. And so those are the things I think we need to be thinking about. And that's what we're pushing schools to do, whether that's through our partnership with the outcomes-based contracting work with the Southern Education Foundation or this alliance we announced at ISTE with ISTE and COSIN and CETA and One EdTech to really think about and Digital Promise, what are those factors that we should be pushing folks to understand? Again, it's not 20. We think it's 5.
Wow, and 5 I think is super manageable, and I think you really hit some of the ones that are valuable to us at Amira, especially the evidence-based. What we've seen recently, and I think this is a lot of your work, is that districts are coming to us saying, "Yeah, we'll pay for year 1, but year 2 is based on you following through on your promise," right? Like,
That's right.
what's that logic model? What are you saying we're getting for this? And if we get it, then you get a second year with us. And it's been a really great change for us at Amira. We love this model, but it's definitely not. Uh, it's new, I guess. I would say 2 years ago that never happened in a district. They never expected anything for us. They were buying and moving on. And so I think from your work, it's gotten a lot better. And I think that they're holding things a lot more. They're holding the companies a lot more accountable, and I think that's valuable for everyone. Because if you're going to use 124 products, here's hoping it's the 124 that are actually going to do something, right?
Yeah, and I think it also, those conversations, I think on the EdTech solution provider side can also tee up something that I think has many EdTech solution providers scratching their head around, which is how do we understand the context in which this tool is being implemented, and how do we think about the implementation conditions? And so I think about so many school districts haven't even had a implementation conditions conversation with their EdTech solution provider. What are the sort of ideal conditions? Maybe, if it's a tutoring product, the same tutor every week, the same dosage, the same sort of ideal professional development that needs to happen before this tool is implemented. And what we know at InnovateEDU through our work with EdTech Evidence Exchange is when you address those context factors, those implementation factors, you can almost undoubtedly address the question of outcomes. And it becomes really clear, not only on the product side, what conditions need to exist and what evidence needs to exist, but in the implementation context of the school district, what is their responsibility to train their teachers on how to use this tool, to make sure that the tool is getting the appropriate dosage and usage. And then beyond that, to say, like, this tool is either working or not working in our context. And so switching costs are really high in EdTech. And so I really appreciate that. But at the same time, I'm not sure that 124 products is what we should be using for any single student. I think if my son interacts with 10, that's probably enough.
It's funny you say the thing that you're saying about implementation really brings me back to the story where I went to go see a teacher. I was in a school, like kind of helping with their implementation, working through what they were doing. And the teacher was like, you need to come and see my email. Like, we have to have this conversation. There's a problem here. She pulls up 2 different emails from the regional director. The first one said, like, you need to use these 4 products with Fidelity. This is what Fidelity looks like. If she had been using those 4 products with Fidelity, it would be an hour and 15 minutes per kid on a screen per day. She also had an email from the same regional director that said children should not be on screens any more than 45 minutes. She's like, there's no way for me to do both of these things. Like, how am like,
Right.
I hear you, I understand, but like, there's no way for me to do both of these things. And it was just so clear how hard she was working to try to implement, but that those things had not been considered. And to your point about the ecosystem, as someone who doesn't really think about the other products, I was like, oh, cut someone else.
Yeah, totally.
Right. But
Totally.
that's a really hard question that teachers shouldn't be forced to answer because it should all work together. I want to ask you one more thing about Innovate EDU because you keep saying this something that just rings with me. The first thing you said was we talked about was IEPs for children in military families. And then recently you just mentioned, if we snowplow the ramp instead of the stairs, is there a reason why children with special needs is kind of a focus area for you, or is that just naturally where you've gravitated?
Well, first, I think it's important to name that 1 in 5 children in this country are students with learning disabilities. And so that's 20% of our young people in this country. And um, it's a big percentage of our kiddos who are spending most of their time in general education classrooms. And so I really think about how, when we think about general education, we can design for all students. And I think what we're beginning to learn about brain science and the learning sciences, there is no average, that learning is jagged for everyone. And so, I think that is one of the reasons that I really believe and try to help educate folks around universal design for learning because of that jaggedness. And then personally, I'm a mom of a student with disabilities. And my son Robert is dyslexic and dysgraphic, which are 2 disabilities that are rarely packaged together. And so He struggles with reading, and he struggles with then expressing his work through the written word. And so for me, technology has been a godsend for Robert because it's really been able to unlock his brilliance and show what he knows through things like text to speech. He still reads paper books, but then he also listens to those paper books through an audiobook. And just the multimodality learning there has meant that Robert has been able to, stay on grade level, if not above, with his peers in the face of having a pretty extreme case of dyslexia and dysgraphia. But spelling tests are really hard in my house. Every week it's a struggle. And I, as a parent, I'm constantly thinking about how much do I push on something that is inherently just painful for him with spelling, because I know that in my life as a professional, I have technology tools that catch my spelling mistakes before I send an email or when I'm writing a brief. And so part of me is probably like many parents and folks on this podcast who are listening. I struggle with that question, which is how do I make sure that I'm working with Robert today to have the skills that he needs to be successful in a future that is increasingly enabled with technology, and I think will increasingly close the gap between sort of where he's struggling and on some basic things like passing that spelling test and how brilliant he is as a young person.
I really appreciate you bringing up the top one, sharing about your son, but also bringing up the spelling test. I don't think you're alone, whether or not your child has dyslexia. I think spelling tests have become quite a thing across the country. So thank you for sharing that. It's interesting because, when we talk about Innovate EDU, it sounds like you've been around forever, doing things forever. I mean, the White House is calling you, right? The First Lady is calling you for help. But before this, you started a school with your husband. Is that right?
That's right. So InnovateEDU is only 10 years old. And we actually started InnovateEDU the same time we started Brooklyn Lab. And we got some really great advice from a group of folks in a dolphin tank in a windowless conference room in San Francisco. Not a shark tank, a dolphin tank. They were trying to be more friendly. So 10 years ago, Shark Tank was like the new hot thing on the scene. So, we were starting Brooklyn Lab in New York City in a pretty challenging political environment. It was either going to be, as we were starting the school, writing the charter, doing that work, which, is well before you open your doors. For your listeners, it takes about 2 years to get there before you can welcome those kids on that first day. Things were shifting around charter schools in New York City and frankly shifting nationally. And um, we were pursuing a pretty innovative model at Brooklyn Lab starting in the sixth grade. And we were doing some really innovative school staffing work with a fellowship program. We were doing some unique technology work, bringing together a platform that brought together all of our learning tools in one place, really focused on interoperability, called Cortex. And so folks said to us in this conference room, listen, you have this organization that you have to like get the schools like spun up. Why don't you think about that as being the scaling agent for some of the innovation that you develop at Brooklyn Lab? Because if you try to do that at a school, it's going to have some of the political and social challenges, but also there's always going to be a push and pull between the operational context of the day-to-day of the school and what your partners are demanding. So that was really the early days of InnovateEDU. We ran the fellowship. We pioneered that model 10 years ago, which was about taking recent college grads and putting them into small group instruction for 1 year before they entered a teaching residency. It's sort of the origin story of the National Partnership for Student Success, the signature initiative of the Biden-Harris administration. But really, that's how we started InnovateEDU. And then Brooklyn Lab became exactly what we intended it to be. It became a school in our own neighborhood that we could walk to, that we saw our kids at Target. You can see Target as a theme in my life. But or at the deli or bodega, we really wanted to create a school that served students who were not traditionally well served by other educational institutions. So we started in the 6th grade. People told us we were crazy, and we took kids who were juvenile justice involved. We took kids who were really struggling in other educational sort of situations. About 40% of our students while we were running Brooklyn Lab were students with IEPs. 20% of our kids were homeless. About 20% were juvenile justice involved. So it was an incredibly diverse school population, school ecosystem. And we had kids who were living in $3 million brownstones, and we had kids who were living in homeless shelters. But they were all coming together in this model that really privileged personalized learning, individual small group instruction. So every kid in the school got 2 hours of small group instruction built in the school day, every single day, 1 hour in math, 1 hour in reading. And what was awesome about that is, with our 40% of kids who needed maybe pullouts, everybody got pulled out of class. So there was like no stigma, and the sense of belonging was amazing. And what I get to sort of relish in now, even though I stepped away from the school more than 5 years ago, is like I get graduation announcements from my first 2 classes, that first 132 kids who we knocked their doors and they met us, and their parents trusted us, or their grandparents or their cousins or whoever was sort of their guardian at the time trusted us. And now they're graduating. Last week I wrote a Fulbright recommendation for one of them. And so I've just seen them blossom into their potential. That is completely amazing. And so I feel so grateful for that experience.
And the
And then I
school
also
still
remember,
and the school
yeah,
still
school's
stands,
still running,
right?
new leadership team, still moving and grooving. And there's some kids who, it's not all unicorns and rainbows, if you will. I mean, probably more that stick with me are some of the kids that we lost to gun violence, to just really hard circumstances in downtown Brooklyn. And I remember their names maybe more, because I just know how much the world lost when we lost kids like Kayvon Collymore and others.
Let me ask you a few questions about this. So the first thing that you mentioned really early on was that there's 2 years of planning
Yeah.
before you open your doors. When you are in those 2 years, how do you stay focused, right? That's a long time to like be holding on to a dream. That's when you get there is going to be hard too, but to keep pushing through. How did you and your husband really, keep forward when it's not easy during that time and you're not sure it's really going to come to fruition?
Yeah. I mean, I think, we, well, if you know anything about Eric and I, it's that sort of when we say we're going to do something, it will happen. And so in that, I definitely had a partner who, uh, when I was flagging, held me up, and so on and so forth. We had a lot of support from the education innovation community, folks like John Dean and Diane Tavener, who had forged a path around personalized learning at Summit Public Schools, folks like Andy Calkins, who was running Next Generation Learning Challenges, folks like Scott Benson at New School Venture Fund, who, when we needed help, would say, look at this or don't do this. We visited schools not just to see what we wanted to do, but what we didn't want to do, which was always super helpful. Um, and frankly, it was the community that held us up and supported that dream. The New York Charter Center who helped us navigate the intense complexity of New York City and New York State laws around charters. I mean, it really was a community that owned this dream, not just Eric and I. And I think that felt like an enormous gift.
We hear sometimes from special educators who listen to the show, and they have a hard time seeing the connection between technology and special education. That kids with IEPs, maybe that's not the direction, right? And I hear them when they're saying things like, "I just don't want my kid with an IEP on a screen all day." I think that that's a fair push. Why was technology such a huge part of your school, with 40% of your students receiving special education services?
Yeah, so part of it was so I said we started in the 6th grade and people told us we were insane. Um because folks knew that we were going to be held up even at year 1 against the yardstick of the summative assessment scores, and if a kid isn't necessarily well served by other educational institutions, you can imagine that there were some pretty significant learning gaps coming to us. And so we had students at that first formative and interim set of assessments and those screenings who were not even hitting the screening because they were reading below a kindergarten um, level. And so, uh, we also did like universal screening for dyslexia, universal font system Pinnell. I mean, we really put a set of interventions in place to understand where students were. And then, we use technology not just for our young people, but for our educators to be able to understand where a student was relative to grade level standards and the precursor standards prior, while they were in science class and in ELA or in math. And then those tutors would also look at that data. And so part of that, having that almost next to real time set of formative assessment scores continuously flowing into the school, meant that we understood that and were able to like understand what the underlying challenge might have been. So I'll talk about some of our kiddos who, you know, 6th grade is fractions. And we had kids who didn't even understand the difference in 1/3 or 3/1 because they didn't understand the precursor standard of the number line. But what we would do is we would use technology and adaptive learning to understand where those skill maps were. Or skill gaps were, and then map those against skill maps, like Jason Zimba's Achieve the Core with the math precursor standards. And then we would know sort of what lesson to teach. And it wouldn't be always that the lesson was delivered through tech. Sometimes it would be. We were early users of Zern, and we thought that the number of at-bats that you could get on core fluency through things like Zern were really, really important. We were early users of Newsela with the ability to sort of meet kids where they were across a variety of texts based on reading levels. And so sometimes technology allowed kids to experience success and allowed educators to scale, frankly, their interventions. But sometimes the technology was frankly just about getting us almost next to real-time formative assessment scores so we could understand where to intervene. And so if kids stayed with us at Brooklyn Lab by the time they were in 8th grade, because remember, we just had so much ground to make up, we never hit beating the state summative assessment scores in 6th grade, and we were sort of okay with that. We knew that our authorizer might have not loved that, but we knew that with so many of our families and communities, we one in that first entry year had to focus on rebuilding trust in the educational system, giving them frequent data about their student, giving that student frequent data about where they were. Among the most difficult things I used to do, and the most hopeful, is sit in those 6th grade first student conferences when they would get their sort of reading levels back. And kids know where they are, but to hear that, to have a really frank conversation with a young person and say, you're reading at a 2nd grade level and we're in 6th grade, so I need you to work harder than you've ever worked over the next 2 to 3 years, not just to get back to 6th grade, but to get back on track. Young people are capable of far more than we give them credit for when we're honest with them and we tell them where they are against the milestones. And so much of the tech that we used was about helping get kids frequent at bats, but also helping our educators be more precise.
That's incredible. And I really love that you know, pointed out that you were really looking at the long game with these kids. It wasn't about year one. Year one wasn't going to be it. That's okay. But we've got 3 years to do the work and get you where you need to be so that you can be successful. And I'm in it with you, right? I need you to work hard for the next couple of years because we're here together. Let me ask you two questions and then we'll move on. One is, what do you miss about being in a school?
Um, Gosh, I miss the kids. And I miss their parents. I get to see them still. I get those graduation announcements. I still do some Zoom calls with them. I see them when I'm in New York. I miss the like, miss, down the hallway, kids telling me about the thing they were like dying to tell me, um, about something that happened to them, or where they found success or winning, the state championship in basketball. I miss that unbridled joy of potential. Um, and uh, that is that's hard. But I still get touches of it. And I find myself, with some of our projects, like begging my teams if I can go on things like school study tours, and other things that put me right back in the field, because I miss that unbridled joy that happens when you sort of discover something new.
Yeah, that's really great. All right. What's something from Brooklyn Lab that really informs what you do at Innovate EDU?
Gosh, there's so many things. I think it's about, I think the number one thing is you really have to think about whatever you're doing in policy, or in tech, and how that actually resonates in the field, and testing things early in the field and getting feedback from folks who are most proximate to the challenge or to the problem. So when we did this military families IP work, I was talking to folks who run state level systems in states where, before we even like debuted this, before we kicked the tires, I was talking to technologists and enterprise architects, but I was also talking to folks at the state level, who are in like uh, high frequency states of transfer, like Georgia or Arizona. But then I was also talking to folks who are in school districts, who are dealing with this in high frequency sort of districts. And so just always testing your hypothesis with the field, and bringing the field as close as possible, um, in proximity to folks who are working on thinking about the problem, either from a technical perspective or from a policy perspective. That proximity really matters. And so even during this moving with the mission launch, I was struggling to think about how are we going to bring the stories of these military families and these military children into the room. And so I made a persona, and made everyone sort of sit with the persona, and including folks at the White House, and get to know Claire Hunt, who was the name of our persona, who uh, was a kid who loved math and loved science, but had an IEP and was struggling. And so, trying again to just put the user at the center of the work always, um, is something that really illuminates all the work we do at InnovateEDU.
I can tell that like solution creating and children and really like finding solutions for people is something that lights you up. Let's talk a little bit about the technology because this is, I think I read this year that there's some predictions that education is going to change more in the next 5 years than it has in the last 100, with this addition of AI. What are you excited about when you think about personalization and technology into education right now?
Yeah, I mean, I am I am so hopeful. I am such an optimist. Um, you know, that we are going to actually be able to make this profession more sustainable. That's the first thing. Um, in educating, in education just broadly, make it more sustainable to be an administrator or a teacher, because some of the most exciting things for me right now in AI are about making the job of screening kids for dyslexia faster and easier while keeping a human in the loop, helping a school district administrator put their put traffic patterns and bus routes into an AI and regen bus routes to make them more efficient and to give kids more time in bed, right? So we don't have to pick kids up 2 hours just to beat the traffic in somewhere like Houston. I'm also really hopeful about what is possible when we make it easier to bring data together. I think there's some tools right now in data synthesis and AI that are really starting to emerge that make me enthusiastic. I'm loving the work that's happening around how do we integrate generative AI into teachers' existing workflow. Not asking them to use another tool, but how do we think about their existing platforms, their existing tools, and using AI there to make it easier to craft a lesson plan or differentiate instruction or give feedback. And so there's a lot of places right now where I think in the next 2 to 3 years, the spaces that make me most hopeful are actually the educator and administrator facing productivity tools. And then a set of tools that I think make the invisible visible. So imagine being able to chew your local community college and four-year university high school catalog, and a high school guidance counselor then being able to see what computer science classes are available for young people to get dual enrollment credit in. So those are the things I'm really, really excited about in AI right now. I think we have some work to do around.
What's your warning? Tell us. Like, okay, I hear your optimism, and optimism is your strength for sure. But like, what's your warning for educators, for schools?
Yeah, I mean, if chatbots turn out to be the way that education manifests AI, we will have missed a gigantic opportunity. So I see this like proliferation right now of chatbots out there that folks think is delivering a level of personalized instruction, and it's not. It's, for me, the first generative AI in the 60s was a health chatbot. If we decide that that's the set of tools that is our sort of uh, ultimate use case, gosh, have we missed the boat on AI and education. And so that's the thing that I'm really pushing folks to think about is what are the use cases that save people time, enhance productivity, but also how do we get beyond just generative AI chatbots and wrappers on top of AI models. And so for me, that's a great place that you can start, but we need to push beyond that. And then I
Yeah.
think the other thing is I see the field being really bewitched by tools right now. And I go back to my earlier comments that if you just look at tools and you don't think about implementation, you don't think about context, you don't think about policy, you don't think about the environment that they're operating in, you don't think about interoperability. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
You're going to see exactly what we've seen in so many schools, right? Where the teachers are there with a mandate to do an hour and 15 minutes and a mandate to do no more than 45 at the same time, right? It's funny. I went to ISTE this year and it was a little intense. It felt like chatbots were just like coming at you. So I appreciate you bringing that up. It felt like they were everywhere. So and I think it's a fair thing to say, and I think it's really hard. I think the word avalanche of AI is real for educators right now. Like
Yeah.
what's coming at them, there's just so much. And so I think really thinking about what you started with, which is like what's actually going to help them as a teacher and as an administrator, is really valuable. All right, we've only got a little bit of time, so we've got a few questions we ask everyone. The first
Great.
question is, the podcast is called More Than a Test, and everyone thinks of something different when they hear the words more than a test. When you heard more than a test, what did you think of?
Yeah, I think about the joy of experiential learning. Like I killed tests in school, but what the things that stick with me, the things that are most formative, the things that um, I still think about today that I want for my own kids is the ability to take the knowledge that you gain in school and in life and then apply it. And so um, I just think about how school has to be more than a test, and we have a duty to make sure that that's not the ultimate way we measure kids' knowledge.
Even if it means really sweaty Subway trips to field trips.
Even if it means sweaty field trips and then nice hot showers.
There you go. Thank the pipes. Tom Vander Ark would love that answer. Okay, I want a lit moment from you. A moment of you in a book that is either like your happy place or changed your life or is like something that you go back to. What's your lit moment?
Yeah, so my parents, when I was 10, gave me Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom. It was the first hardback book I got, and I still have it. And um, that book is something that I pick up at least once a month. And the thing that sticks with me um, about that book is the last couple pages when Nelson Mandela says, we've climbed to the top of this mountain and we have so many more mountains to climb, that you're never done, that and that when you fall down you just have to keep getting up, and those you have to look to the people around you to lift you up and to support you. And so where I am today in education is, I think we've climbed some pretty big mountains. I think we've reached some summits, but there's so many more mountains to climb.
I really love that. And what a book for your parents to give you at 10. Like, good parents is what I'd say. Good parents.
Yeah.
All right. A piece of technology you love.
Oh my gosh. This is such a weird thing to say, but
Is it the Target
I love
app?
my No, but I don't always love the Target app. I think their user experience could use some work. I love my AirPods because sometimes I need to drown out the noise. And that sometimes means like when I'm working out or taking a walk. Sometimes they allow me to connect with people in noisy environments because I'm traveling so much. But I love my AirPods because they both bring me peace, but also help me drive connection.
Oh, that's really lovely. The best advice you've ever been given.
Don't stop fighting.
Wow, that was good. I love the way you said that. And one book you think everyone should read.
Long Walk to Freedom. No, in education, yeah, read that. But another book that was really formative for me was Jonathan Kozo's Savage Inequalities. I grew up in a really, really privileged environment in Scottsdale, Arizona, and it took me going places like University of Michigan and then some of my first overseas assignments to understand the inherence of the privilege I had because I saw the absence of it. I think Jonathan Kozol is an author who can get his readers to understand the stratification in our education system and why we must continue to invest in public education as a means for justice and democracy in this country.
That was really lovely. I just wrote "Don't Stop Fighting" on my paper that I keep right here every day. So thank you so much for that. I needed it today. Thanks for spending time with us. Thanks
Thank
for all
you.
the work that you're doing for military families, for kids, for schools, and really, in every answer I heard, teachers at the forefront of everything you do, and I really appreciate that. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the More Than a Test podcast. If you found this conversation valuable, subscribe to our YouTube channel and find us on your favorite podcast platform. At Amira Learning, we believe every child deserves a chance to become a reader, and we're excited to be part of this conversation. See you next week, and thanks for joining.